Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Alexandra Adanma, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Oh, good evening from Pakistan. Good evening from South Africa. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Jai Sarva Lakshmi. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare. Okay, Jai Lamis. So we can take this away, yeah. Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So devotees, Hare Krishna, let us go into our Prabhupada-lilamrita reading. I believe it's the 23rd session, something like that. Anyway, we are in chapter 10. Yes, chapter 10. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasna Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Niravishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatyadesh Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchikapaturubhyascha kripas sindubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So it's now 1961. Prabhupada is back. Well, he's in between Keshi Ghat, the Vangsi Gopalji temple, and Chippiwada, the Radha Krishna temple there. In January of 1961, one of Bhaktivedanta Swami's Delhi acquaintances had shown him an announcement for the Congress for Cultivating Human Spirit, a convention to be held in Tokyo from May the 10th to the 20th. The theme was World Peace through Cultivating Human Spirit. International participants were invited. As soon as Bhaktivedanta Swami had seen it, he had wanted to go. Although his main interest had always been the United States, if Japan presented itself first, why not? So Prabhupada, he's just got such an avid interest in preaching. He's just so totally focused, and I was going to say consumed, just preach, must preach, find ways to preach. So he thought this could be a good opportunity. And their invitation was in English. If they accepted his reservation, they would pay for his board and lodging at the convention hotel, although he would have to pay his own travel expenses. And we know that could be quite a challenge for Prabhupada. Bhaktivedanta Swami wrote to the sponsors, the International Foundation for Cultural Harmony, and proposed a speech. How should one cultivate human spirit? The Secretary General of the foundation, Mr. Toshihiro Nakano, wrote back to him at Keshi Ghat, expressing his high regard both for Indian spiritual culture and for his proposed presentation. Mr. Nakano also enclosed an official certificate, as he had requested, stating that Bhaktivedanta Swami was a bona fide visitor to their convention, whose expenses in Japan would be paid. They requested, to whom it may concern, that his passport and visa be granted in time for his May the 10th arrival in Japan. Bhaktivedanta Swami then conceived a special project for the convention. The 10th canto, 20th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam presents a description of autumn in Vrindavan, and for each seasonal phenomenon, the Bhagavatam presents a parallel teaching from the Vedas. For example, it compares the dark, cloudy evening of the rainy autumn season to the present age of Kali, when the bright stars of Vedic wisdom, the saints and scriptures, are temporarily obscured by a godless civilization. The chapter contains dozens of such examples, and Bhaktivedanta Swami proposed 50 commentaries to accompany 50 illustrations to be displayed at the convention. He began preparing the commentaries, which he entitled The Light of the Bhagavat. You're familiar with that book? No. Oh, it's one of Prabhupada's books. It's around. He wrote directions from which an artist could design a painting to go with each, quote unquote, lesson from the picture. 50 pictures and commentaries, Bhaktivedanta Swami felt, would make an impressive display for visitors at the convention. The convention organizers liked the idea. And so the organizers wrote back to Prabhupada as follows. As for your proposal to get pictures drawn by artists according to your suggestion, the institution department of the Congress will immediately take people disposal for it under the full consideration of about some specimen idea of picture which will be given to us by you, so I should like to get them as soon as possible. They want Prabhupada to prepare some sort of like little sketch or something. Bhaktivedanta, so unquote, Bhaktivedanta Swami worked quickly to produce a 20,000-word manuscript, 50 lessons for 50 illustrations. The pictures were to depict the forests, fields, and skies of Vrindavan during the rainy season, and the lessons were sometimes criticisms of godless governments, materialists, and false religionists, sometimes assertions of moral principles and God consciousness, and sometimes depictions of Lord Krishna and his eternal associates in Vrindavan. Everything went smoothly between Bhaktivedanta Swami and the sponsors in Japan. The problem was, you guessed it, to raise the travel fare. He approached the likely sources, writing to the central government's Ministry for Scientific Research and Cultural Affairs. He presented his certificate from Mr. Nikanu and explained his position as a sannyasi. In late March, the ministry sent him a form to complete and return. Time was getting short. On March 29th, he wrote the Vice President, Dr. Radha, with whom he had a speaking acquaintance, as well as a philosophical difference. Quote, "You know that I'm a sannyasi without any relation with bank, neither I am attached with financing institution. But the Japanese organizers have liked my literatures and they want me to be present there," unquote. He pleaded that since the great acharyas of India had formally presented their knowledge for the benefit of the world, the Indian government today should send representatives of the acharyas, quote unquote, to deliver the message of Atma, or the human spirit, unquote. He also wrote the deputy manager of Scindia Steam Navigation Company in Bombay, reminding him of his 1958 offer to give a 50% concession on a ticket to the United States. After explaining his invitation from Mr. Nakano in Japan, Bhaktivedanta Swami pointed out that the full round-trip fare to Japan would be less than half the fare to the United States. Trying all possibilities at once, and with less than a month and a half before the convention, he wrote to another potential donor, Mr. Brijratan S. Mohata, who had once expressed his willingness to send Bhaktivedanta Swami to South America when an Indian sponsor there had written expressing interest. At that time, Bhaktivedanta Swami had been unable to get the proper certification from the Indian government, because in those days, if you wanted to go out of India, you needed special permission. You couldn't just, buy a ticket and go, and, as long as you had a visa for your destination, you had to get permission to leave India. But here, he explained, was a new opportunity to present the message of the Vedic literature to an international gathering of interested people, and passage to Japan was less than to South America. On the same day he wrote to Mr. Mohata, he also mailed his completed form to the Ministry for Scientific Research. In answer to their question as to why he was asking for a donation and whether he had done so before, he replied, quote, "Before this, I never asked the ministry for any financial assistance, as there was no need for it. As sannyasi, I can ask for financial help when there's absolute necessity. Our life is dedicated to render service to the humanity at large, for reviving the dormant spiritual consciousness," unquote. Meanwhile, his other arrangements proceeded with full cooperation from Japan. He had already sent Mr. Nakano the first 20 illustrative ideas from the light of Bhagavat. "Japan is famous for artistic work," he wrote, "and India is famous for spiritual culture. We should now combine." He suggested they also print the text and pictures as a book. Mr. Nakano assured Bhaktivedanta Swami that they would be eager to meet him at Haneda Airport. They would be readily recognizable since they would be holding a flag. And if he liked, he could stay in Japan for an entire month and hold local meetings after the scheduled convention. Mr. Nakano also asked a favor of Bhaktivedanta Swami to solidify relations with the mayors of 3 Japanese cities. He asked that Bhaktivedanta Swami send letters to the mayors requesting their full support of the Human Spirit Congress. Bhaktivedanta Swami immediately complied. By now it was April, and no money had come. Finally, after a personal interview in which he received a definite no from Dr. Radha Krishnan, Bhaktivedanta Swami turned to Mr. Nakano in disappointment. On April 18th, he wrote, quote, "I am in due receipt of your letter of the 9th instant, and I'm grateful to you for all that you've said for me. I am a humble creature, and I'm just trying to do my bit in this connection because I was so ordered by my spiritual master, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. While I'm feeling too much ecstasy for the reception arrangement you're doing for me, I beg to inform you that my passage expenses, which is near about rupees 3,500, is not yet settled. I submitted one application to the Government of India for help, and the copy of my application is also sent herewith. I also wrote a private letter to Dr. S. Radhakrishnan in this connection, and the reply which I've received is also enclosed herewith. All these are not very encouraging for me. I therefore saw the Vice President today personally, but he says the same thing as he has written in his letter. Although the matter is not yet hopeless altogether, I am disturbed in my mind, thinking, what shall I do in case the government denies to help? I'm therefore seeking your good advice in this connection. Dr. S. Radhakrishnan said to me that you'd also invited him to attend your Congress, and he opines that the passage expenses might have been paid by you. The hope and expectation of the Congress is undoubtedly very great, and I wish that I may fully utilize this opportunity for general welfare of the entire human society. I've fully explained my views authoritatively in my statements already sent to you for publication, and the gist idea is expressed in the letter of the mayors, the copy of which is also enclosed. As a sannyasi, I have no personal purse for expenditure. Under the circumstances, if the government denies to help for the passage, then I will have to ask for the same from you. Otherwise, my going to the Congress will end in dream only. I have very little faith in the dealings of the politicians, and especially of the Indian politicians. From the conversation of Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, it appeared to me that the government does not approve of such congress as are organized by private persons, and as such they do not participate in such congress. I shall wait for the final decision for 1 week more, when the matter will be clear, yes or no," unquote. Replies from prospective donors in India were all negative. On April 20th, he cabled Mr. Nakano, quote, "As you have developed a deep love for me, I dare to ask you to send me financial help to take me to Japan. I think you can immediately instruct your embassy in Delhi to do the needful and dispatch me to Japan on your behalf. I'm feeling too much to meet you and the Congress so that we can build up a solid institute for spiritual cultivation. I shall await your instruction by cable to fix up my program," unquote. But Mr. Nakano could not help, and Bhaktivedanta Swami's effort ended in a dream only. In July 1962, so it's amazing, isn't it? 3,500 rupees, you know. Of course, in those days, it's probably $500-600. When I first went to India in 76, so it's already 15 years after this, there was 8 rupees to the dollar. 8 rupees to the dollar. And, you know, so 3,500 rupees was $400 and something. In July 1962, Bhaktivedanta Swami changed his Vrindavan residence from Vangsi Gopalji Temple to Radha Damodar Temple. For 3 years, he had been paying the rent of 5 rupees per month for his Radha Damodar rooms and paying for the extensive repairs. Now, the main room had electric lighting and a fan, and the walls had been plastered and painted. The room was 7 feet by 15 feet, with smooth plaster walls and a floor of sandstone squares of uneven sizes, the same as the stone tiles cemented in front of the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. The room was furnished with a small low desk, a kusha mat, and a wooden cot with a rope-woven surface to lie on. The view was not the panorama he had enjoyed at Keshi Ghat, and the neighborhood was not so secluded. But now, without even moving from his room, he could look into the temple and see a portion of the altar and the 4-foot-high form of Vrindavan Chandra, the black marble Krishna deity Krishnadas Kaviraj had worshipped hundreds of years ago. The main room was connected to the kitchen by a 10-foot-long veranda which faced the courtyard, and from his kitchen he could see the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. So the place was superior to his room at the Vangsi Gopalji temple, because now he was living in the temple of Jiva Goswami, where great souls like the Goswamis, Rupa, Sanatan, Raghunath, and Jiva had all gathered, taken prasadam, chanted, and discussed Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. It was the best place to work on Srimad Bhagavatam. At 1 a.m., when no one else was up and it was very quiet, Bhaktivedanta Swami would wake and begin writing. Since electric failures were not uncommon in Vrindavan, he would often work by lantern light. But in any case, a beam of light would shine out from his room onto the veranda, while inside the room he worked under its brightness. While he wrote in stillness, sometimes a toad, as dry as the stone floor, would hop out of hiding and across the floor, exiting through the cement lattice work of the opposite wall. Sometimes a tiny mouse would run out from behind a window shutter and hide in another place. Otherwise, the room was complete sanctified stillness, and the inspiration of being in the presence of the 6 Goswamis was strong. Above the open courtyard, the sky would be full of clearly visible stars. As he worked, the only sounds would come from the town, perhaps of a dog barking in the distance. At 4 a.m., the temple pujari, who slept under a shelter near the deity doors, would awake, turn on an electric light, and with a long pole clear the bats from the rafters. At 5 a.m., after waking the deities, the pujari would open the doors before the altar and begin Mangal Arati. He would offer a flame while a few resident devotees gathered and chanted, playing instruments. Usually someone would bang a gong while someone else rang a large bell. Any sound from the courtyard carried immediately to Bhaktivedanta Swami's quarters, and the clanging bell and gong would suddenly reverberate against the walls of his small room. From his sitting place, he could see only Vrindavan Chandra on the left of the altar. Sometimes he would pause at his work and walk into the courtyard to see the deities in their arti. The altar was filled with deities of Radha and Krishna, who had been worshipped by Jiva Goswami and other Vaishnava acharyas hundreds of years ago. After 10 minutes, the pujari, having offered the flame and then a conch shell filled with water, would turn and sprinkle offered water on the heads of the devotees, and the ceremony would end. After working a few hours on Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhaktivedanta Swami would sit in his room and chant japa. As the morning sky turned light blue, the stars would vanish, and residents of Vrindavan would arrive to visit the deities and the samadhis of the Goswamis. Old women would enter the temple, calling out Jai Radha in broken voices. When Bhaktivedanta Swami opened the shutters, his room would fill with light. His windows faced a courtyard, but they were not so much windows as cement lattice work in the wall, although passers-by could not easily see into the room. The lattice work allowed light to enter. In the morning light, the room was clearly revealed. The arched ceiling, the freshly painted walls with arched niches, the floor of inlaid stone. Bhaktivedanta Swami's thin sannyas danda, wrapped in heavy saffron khadi, leaned against one corner of the room. On one shelf, he'd placed a picture of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. On another, a stack of books and manuscripts. The room's 2 doors appeared flimsy even when locked, and the whole room tilted slightly to the left. Sure. It was bare but peaceful. Often, sitting on the veranda between the 2 rooms, he would view the courtyard, the altar, and the deities. Radha Damodar, Vrindavan Chandra, and several other Radha Krishna deities awaited their visitors. There's 4 sets: Radha Damodar, Vrindavan Chandra, Kalki-chan, and there's another one set of main deities, at least. Yeah. Kalki-chan. During the morning, is it Radha Madhav? Okay. Of Jayadev. During the morning, the deity doors remained open as a regular file of visitors turned the temple into a bustling place of pilgrimage. No one stayed very long. Some had rigid schedules to visit many temples and hurried on. Poor people and also local businessmen, their wives in colorful saris, all devotees, headed towards the altar, calling Jai Ho, Jai Radhe. After greeting the deities, they would disappear through the door to to the outdoor area of the temple compound to visit the samadhis. That's the door to the left. Although in Vrindavan there were hundreds of small temple-like tombs honoring past Vaishnava acharyas, Bhaktivedanta Swami regularly visited the chief samadhis, those of Sri Jiva Goswami, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. Within a separate area of the temple compound were the Bhajan Kutia and the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. Bhaktivedanta Swami often sat chanting japa before Rupa Goswami's Samadhi. The line of pilgrims from the temple would continue entering the outdoor area of the compound, coming to offer dandavats to Rupa Goswami. Most pilgrims considered this the most important feature of their visit to Radha Damodar temple, and even if they offered respect nowhere else, they would stop before the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. They would stop with folded hands and bow, chanting Jai Radhe, or with their hands in their bead bags, chant the Hare Krishna mantra, circumambulating the Samadhi. Bhaktivedanta Swami would sit and chant even after the early morning rush of visitors, or sometimes he would walk to the nearby temples of Radha Shyam Sundar or Radha Madan Mohan, always returning by 11 to cook his meal. As he cooked, and later as he sat to take his prasadam, he could see through the lattice work the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami. Feeling Rupa Goswami's presence, he would think of his own mission for his spiritual master. The devotees of Lord Chaitanya are known as Rupanugas, followers of Rupa Goswami. Without following the teachings and example of Rupa Goswami, one cannot enter the path of pure devotion to Radha and Krishna. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was especially known as a strict Rupanuga, as described in the Sanskrit prayers written in his honor. Quote, I offer my respectful obeisances unto Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the personified energy of Sri Chaitanya's mercy, who delivers devotional service enriched with conjugal love of Radha and Krishna, coming exactly in the line of revelation of Srila Rupa Goswami. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, who are the personified teachings of Lord Chaitanya. You are the deliverer of the fallen souls. You do not tolerate any statement that is against the teachings of devotional service enunciated by Srila Rupa Goswami, unquote. Bhaktivedanta Swami's spiritual master and the previous spiritual masters in the disciplic succession had wanted the Krishna consciousness movement to spread all over the world. And as Bhaktivedanta Swami daily gathered inspiration, sitting before Rupa Goswami's Samadhi, he prayed to his spiritual predecessors for guidance. The intimate direction he received from them was an absolute dictation, and no government, no publisher, nor anyone else could shake or diminish it. Rupa Goswami wanted him to go to the west. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted him to go to the west. Krishna had arranged that he be brought to Radha Damodar temple to receive their blessings. At the Radha Damodar temple, he felt he had entered an eternal residence known only to pure devotees of the Lord. Yet, although they were allowing him to associate intimately with them in their place of pastimes, they were ordering him to leave Radha, Damodar and Vrindavan, and to deliver the message of the acharyas to forgetful parts of the world. In June, the weather became intolerably hot. Have you been there in June? It's hot, yeah? Wow, that's amazing. I've only been there in April. It was not really very hot. Okay, in June, the weather became intolerably hot, and one could not remain active through the afternoon. During the most oppressive hours, Bhaktivedanta Swami would shut his doors and shutters and run the overhead fan. By evening, the heat would abate. Again, a flurry of visitors would arrive, and in the temple compound, there would be evening kirtans. Sitting on his veranda, Bhaktivedanta Swami would sometimes talk with visitors, or sometimes they would come to his door and observe him as he worked at his typewriter. He was known in Vrindavan as a scholar and a sublime devotee, but he kept to himself as much as possible, especially in the summer of 1962, working on Srimad Bhagavatam. That was his real purpose in coming here, to prepare the books he would distribute to the people of the West. Although as yet he had no means for traveling even as far as Japan, and no means for printing books, these were the goals for which he worked. He had not come to Vrindavan to die and return to Godhead, because that's, how many of these people, the devotees there, that's how they think, many of them, that they won't leave Vrindavan, because if they leave Vrindavan, they die outside Vrindavan. They're afraid that, they'll just take birth again. Yeah. So they just sort of hang on in Vrindavan. So he had not come to Vrindavan to die and return to Godhead. Rather, he had come because it was the ideal place to gain spiritual strength for his main life's work. The exact shape of his future mission, Bhaktivedanta Swami did not know, but he did know that he must prepare himself for preaching Srimad Bhagavatam to the English-speaking Western world. He must become a perfectly equipped instrument of his masters, and if they desired, they would send him. Chapter 11, the dream come true, and opening with some words from Prabhupada. I planned that I must go to America. Generally they go to London, but I did not want to go to London. I was simply thinking how to go to New York. I was scheming whether I should go this way through Tokyo, Japan, or that way. Which way is cheaper? That was my proposal. And I was targeting to New York always. Sometimes I was dreaming that I've come to New York. Srila Prabhupada. You been to New York? Been? Okay, so let's just see. How long? Oh, it's pretty long. Oh, it's very long. Anyway, we'll just read some. Writing was only half the battle. The other half was publishing. Both Bhaktivedanta Swami and his spiritual master wanted to see Srimad Bhagavatam printed in English and distributed widely. According to the teachings of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the most modern methods of printing and distributing books should be used to spread Krishna consciousness. Although many books of Vaishnava wisdom had already been perfectly presented by Rupa Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, and Jiva Goswami, the manuscripts now sat deteriorating in the Radha Damodar temple and other locations. And even the Gaudiya Math's printings of the Goswamis' works were not being widely distributed. One of Bhaktivedanta Swami's godbrothers asked him why he was spending so much time and effort trying to make a new commentary on the Bhagavatam, since so many great acharyas had already commented upon it. But in Bhaktivedanta Swami's mind, there was no question. His spiritual master had given him an order. Commercial publishers, however, were not interested in the 60-volume Bhagavatam series. And Bhaktivedanta Swami was not interested in anything less than a 60-volume parampara presentation of verses, synonyms, and purports based on the commentaries of the previous acharyas. But to publish such books, he would have to raise private donations and publish at his own expense. Radha Damodar temple may have been the best place for writing Srimad Bhagavatam, but not for printing and publishing it. For that, he would have to go to New Delhi. Among his Delhi contacts, Bhaktivedanta Swami considered Hitsaran Sharma a likely helper. Although when he had stayed in Mr. Sharma's house, Mr. Sharma had appreciated him more as a member of a genre than as an individual, at least Mr. Sharma was inclined to help sadhus, and he recognized Bhaktivedanta Swami as a genuinely religious person. Therefore, when Bhaktivedanta Swami approached him in his office, he was willing to help, considering it a religious duty to propagate Srimad Bhagavatam. Hitsaran Sharma was qualified to help for two reasons. He was the secretary to J.D. Dalmia, a wealthy philanthropist, and he was the owner of a commercial printing works, Radha Press. According to Mr. Sharma, Mr. Dalmia would not directly give money to Bhaktivedanta Swami, even if his secretary suggested it. Mr. Sharma therefore advised Bhaktivedanta Swami to go to Gorakhpur and show his manuscript to Hanuman Prasad Poda, a religious publisher. He's Gita Press. You heard of Gita Press? Oh yeah, they're the big publishers of the traditional Hindu, the Vedic scriptures. They're all over. Accepting this as good advice, Bhaktivedanta Swami journeyed to Gorakhpur, some 475 miles from Delhi. Even such a trip as this constituted a financial strain, Bhaktivedanta Swami's daily ledger showed a balance of 130 rupees as of August the 8th, 1962, the day he started for Gorakhpur. By the time he reached Lucknow, he was down to 57 rupees. Shoo. Travel from Lucknow to Gorakhpur cost another 6 rupees. And the rickshaw to Mr. Poda's home cost 80 paisa. Prabhupada was recording all these things. But the trip was well worth the cost. Bhaktivedanta Swami presented Mr. Poda with his letter of introduction from Hitsaran Sharma and then showed him his manuscript. After briefly examining the manuscript, Mr. Poda concluded it to be a highly developed work that should be supported. He agreed to send a donation of 4,000 rupees to the Dalmia Trust in Delhi to be used towards the publication of Sri A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami's Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.